My name is Tom Wiggs, and I'm the pastor here at Eastside, and I want to say that I'm so glad you clicked on this video. We have prayed that it would be a blessing and a help to you as you grow spiritually. I also want to remind you that part of our heart here at Eastside is that you would be growing in connection with a local gathering of believers. Don't let this video be a replacement for a local church. If you're in the Mooresville area, you would be so welcome to come worship with us. And now, here's the message.
But what I want to do is take us into Matthew chapter 16. And we're going to be in Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 20, and walk through this real quick. And as you're finding your place there, Christ is here with his disciples, and he looks at them and he says, as he comes into Caesarea Philippi, he asks his disciples, he says, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets." So they think that Jesus is a prophet. And Jesus, said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And this is where Simon Peter has one of his moments. You know, I love the life of Simon Peter because we see these amazing moments in Simon Peter's life, and then we see these amazing failures in Simon Peter's life. Anybody can relate to that? Because I know that I can. And Simon Peter replies to him and he says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Peter has this moment where God reveals to him the truth that Christ is the Messiah. But then as we go on, we see verse 18. And Jesus says, "And I tell you, you, Peter, and on this rock, and I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was Christ. The truth that the church is being built on is the truth that Jesus is the Messiah. And the amazing thing here is that Christ says the gates of hell are not going to stand against the truth that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. The church is to be declaring this. You know, I think sometimes there's a mentality in the church that the church is a castle and we all come in and we pull up the drawbridges and we are defending all of us from everything else outside. But I'm going to push back on you just a little bit, because I think the exact opposite is true. Somebody said it this way: missions properly understood is this: we are the marauding, crazy warriors attacking the usurping deceiver's gates, and they are not going to stand. We are not going into our churches to hide and protect ourselves from the world. We are going to arm ourselves so that we can go out as lunatic warriors. The purpose of coming here is to get armed so that we can go out and reveal the truth that Christ is the Messiah. The gates of hell cannot stand against the truth that Christ is the Messiah. This isn't a castle with drawbridges that we're pulling up. It's a training ground. But then we have this turn in the story. And it says this in verse 21. "From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised." And Peter, and this is one of Peter's moments, because I imagine it kind of went something like this: Hey, Jesus, come over here. Hey, listen, you got to stop saying that. Because Peter takes him aside and begins to rebuke him. Can you imagine rebuking the guy that you just declared was the Messiah, that God revealed this to you. That's one heck of a fisherman, don't you think? He must have been a pretty big guy to one moment declare, you're the Messiah, and the next minute say, hey, come here, Jesus. You got to stop talking like that. Far be it from you, Lord, that shall never happen to you. But he, being Jesus, turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but setting your mind on the things of man. When was the only other time that Christ called somebody Satan? Do you remember? When it was Satan at the temptation. And I think that this is a little bit like the temptation. What Satan was offering to Christ in the wilderness, he said, here, all you have to do is bow down and worship to me, and I'll give you all of these things. You can have all the glory without the suffering. Christ says you're a stumbling block to me. Peter is thinking about these things in the wrong way, and Christ is saying, you are preventing me from going forward with a mission that I know God has called me to. You're a hindrance to me. Peter is advocating for this shortcut to the glory without having to suffer, die, and fulfill his destiny of redemption and shed blood on the cross. Peter's trying to say, no, Lord, you don't have to go through the tough stuff. That's not what it's going to be. And I think as Peter's thinking about this, he's probably looking back at all the Old Testament passages that talk about the king that is coming. And I think Christ is probably thinking about all the Old Testament passages that talk about the suffering of the Messiah that's coming. There are no shortcuts. And in verse 24 and 25, Christ looks at his disciples and he says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So that's where the title, Die, Just Die, comes from. We're called to die. But I want to stop and think about this. He says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. I think sometimes we don't have a proper understanding of what the cross is. It's something that we wear on a necklace. It's something we put up on Easter and put some purple on. But as I was looking at this, I came across this in my study, and so I want to share this with you. This word, excruciating. Do you know the word excruciating? Usually that's not a word that is ever used in a good context, right? I have excruciating pain. Okay? It comes from the word excruciare, which is anybody here a Latin scholar? Good, so you're not going to know if I'm saying it wrong or not, okay? It comes from this word right here, which is two parts. Ex, meaning from, out of, or through, and crux, the Latin word for cross. The cross was a symbol of horrible torture, humiliation, pain, and death. Christ tells his disciples what's coming. Peter says, no, Lord, not you. Christ says, get behind me. We're not taking the shortcut. We can't avoid the suffering to get to the glory. And then the next thing he tells them is what? By the way, if you're going to follow me, take up that instrument of death and torture and excruciating pain and haul that along with you. Because that's what it's going to be. Take up your cross and follow me. Now, this struck me, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it struck me that Christ, in those verses above, didn't tell them, I'm going to die a death on a cross. For us, we look back and we know the death he died, And so we're like, yeah, take up your cross and follow me. You wonder if the disciples understood at this moment that Christ was saying he was going to die on a cross, or if this was one of those aha moments that they had later on as they're watching him on the cross die this slow, horrible, painful death. And these words, take up your cross and follow me, ring in their ears. Take up your instrument of death and pain and be willing to die and give up your life, because that's what it takes to follow me. It's interesting, we talk about suffering for believers in Scripture. John 15:20, I'm just going to read through these. I didn't put them up. John 15:20, Christ says, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you. Matthew 10:16, he says, behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Sheep in the middle of wolves. That does not sound like a picnic in the park. Sounds like there might be some suffering there. Matthew 10:24 and 25. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they malign those of his house? In Philippians 1, verses 12 through 18, Paul says, hey, I'm in jail. Look at all these things happening to me, but it's all for good things. The entire book of 1 Peter is to encourage the suffering church and remind them that suffering is to be expected if you are a follower of Christ. The suffering is physical as well. And so as I was thinking about this, I'm looking at 2 Corinthians, and Paul says, 5 times I received at the hand of the Jews 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day adrift at sea. Interesting that he ties those things into the suffering as well. On frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers. In toil and hardship through many a sleepless night, in hunger and in thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from all of these other things, there's the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. So this is Paul's list of sufferings that he was going through. The sufferings are physical as well. And what's really even more interesting, and I would love to dive into this, but we do not have time. If you look at 2 Corinthians 12:7, Paul's thorn in the flesh. It says, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me. So Paul's recognizing that he had demonic oppression that caused physical ailment in his life that was part of the suffering of being a follower of Christ. There's no shortcuts. And we see in 2 Timothy 3:12, indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ will be persecuted. Are we like Peter? Am I looking for the shortcut? Do I want the glory and the goodness of God without the suffering and the fact that there is death that comes as well? This has been a New York Times bestseller book. There's lots of churches that preach this. You can have it all now. Pat, is this the most encouraging missions message that you had to preach today? But I'm going to be honest to you, the last 18 months, I've really had to look at a theology of risk and suffering and say, what is a biblical theology about the suffering that we should expect to face as followers of Christ? And when I look at the list of that Paul had up there, that wasn't all just like I'm being beaten. Sometimes it was, I'm hungry. I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm worried about people in the churches. I'm worried about the dangers of sea. I'm going to cry now because as I stood up here yesterday, praying about this message, saying, God, what am I supposed to say? And I was just standing here and I thought, oh, I'm going to see if I can plug in my laptop. And I looked down right here in this pulpit is in memory of one of my dear friends who I didn't get to go to his funeral because I was obeying and being where I was supposed to be. I think that's part of the suffering. We miss some of those things. My question is this. What is it that I need to die to put to death, so that I can make his name great? What is it that you need to die to in your life and say, I'm willing to endure the suffering. I'm willing to give up the comfort. I'm willing to give up the financial. I'm willing to give up the prestige of my job so that I can make much of his name. Missions is about giving up my desires, wants, and needs to make his name great. Jesus is going to have every nation, every tongue, and every tribe worshiping him. I want to be there at the end and have him look at me and say, well done. Well done. And so what's interesting is Grace today said, I haven't felt called to missions, but all of this was about how do I reach people? What I'm telling you is the minute you walk out that door, you're entering the mission field. But I want you to remember that you're here to get equipped, because when you walk out into that mission field, I think this sign should say something a little bit different. One of the churches that we go to when we're in Florida has this sign at all of their exits. Churches often put it over the door. I had to check and see if you'd added it or not. If you decide to add it, I think it should look like this. Because missions is a knife fight. We're in a battle. We're in a war with an enemy, and we want to aggressively take that territory and give it to our king. What's the number one rule of a knife fight? You know, that was rhetorical, but that is exactly the answer I would have expected here. Number two rule of a knife fight is don't get in a knife fight. Because the number three rule is everybody bleeds in a knife fight. We're in a knife fight with an enemy that wants to do anything he can to make sure that God's name isn't being glorified and to prevent humans from believing. That's his goal. And there's suffering that comes with that. And there's things that I have to die to in my own life so that I can be effective in that. My question is, what's he calling you to? Are you ready to surrender whatever it is that he's calling you to die to? Are you participating in the suffering of Christ? Because he says it's going to come. Don't be surprised when it comes. Come here, get trained, get healed, because everybody bleeds in a knife fight. So sometimes this is the place of healing, but it's also a place of growth and learning how we're going to combat the enemy so that we can make much of his name. I was in Nairobi last month, and the different teams were giving testimonies of their ministries and what's been happening. One of the men stood up and said I was supposed to be preaching the next day in Niger. He's an African fellow. And he said, the news came to me that my brother had just been executed, shot in the head for preaching the gospel. And the people I was with looked at me and said, you don't have to preach tomorrow. We can find somebody else. And he said, no, I have to. I have to declare the truth. That was his part of the suffering. That's what he was willing to die to so that much could be made of our King's name. We can't get to the glory without the suffering. There's no shortcuts. Let's pray.